Now let's bring in the president of the National Urban League and former mayor of New Orleans, Mark Morial. I want to start with this question of black crime, Mr. Morial. Rudy Giuliani, Mayor Giuliani, likes to point out that 93% of blacks in America are killed by other blacks. So the point he's making, and I think a lot of people are making, is when the protesters, when civil rights leaders are focusing on the problem with the police, aren't they ignoring the real problem in the black community?
Let's add another fact, and that is about 84% of all whites are murdered by other whites. And the concern about violence in the black community is pervasive. The advocacy, the rallies, the events that take place, it should be no mistake that black-on-black violence is not tolerated in the black community. But the protests, Chris, are directed at the response of the system to the killings of unarmed black men, and in the case of Cleveland, a child, and the lack of accountability when those events take place. It's also the fact that we've had 5 high-profile incidents in this country in a short period of time: Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Marlene Pinnock out in Los Angeles, and now the young boy out in Cleveland. And combined with the fact that the number of killings of citizens by police is at a 2-decade high, all of this is a perfect storm of events, which means that there's this response across the nation, peaceful protests for the most part, that says that this must change.
Well, let's talk about possible reforms. The Urban League is calling for a number of reforms in the wake of Ferguson, including federal reviews of every police killing. Why is that necessary? Why can't the local community handle that, sir?
I think the history has been, and I heard Mayor Giuliani talk about this, but I want to make this important point, that in the Abner Louima case, in the Rodney King case, in the Danziger Bridge case in New Orleans, those are all cases where local prosecutors failed to either seek or secure an indictment or a conviction, where the federal government stepped in after the fact and secured justice for the victims. The history is simply not good for local prosecutors and, to some extent, local police departments policing their own. That's why this is a time for us to change how we handle these instances. And I think, at the first instance, I support body cameras. I think there ought to be a national accreditation system for police officers. I think every city should review their deadly force policy. I think that cities should also completely revise how they train. They have to reevaluate how they hire police officers. This is a time when we've got to promote positive change. And I might add, I led a city, New Orleans, at the same time that Rudy led New York. We reduced crime by 60%. We did it with community policing. And we also had a significant reduction in civil rights complaints against police departments. So this is a false, if you will, narrative that you've got to be out there doing stop and frisk. You've got to be, that there's a trade-off between what I would call safety and violations of citizen civil rights. I think you can do both. And I think that's the future we've got to embrace in this nation.
Well, let's talk about that, because you just heard Mayor Giuliani, and I put a list of things. He agreed with you about the body cams. He agreed with you about having a police force that more accurately reflects the racial makeup of a city. Obviously, that wasn't the case in Ferguson, where the city is 2/3 black and 50 of the 53 police officers were white. Where he disagreed with you, or at least partially, was on the question of what's called aggressive police forcing. You have called for an end to the broken window kind of policing and stop and frisk, but doesn't the crime rate actually go down? It certainly did in New York when they did stop and frisk.
You know, stop and frisk used selectively and in a targeted way is absolutely permissible and a valid police tool. Using it comprehensively all the way across the city. One of the experiences that caught my eye in New York was that many of these stops and these frisks did not yield the recovery of a gun or a prosecution or a conviction for weapons charges. So it's an inefficient way. I think it's better, if you will, to embrace a proactive, and this is the term, proactive policing system, where police officers are out on the beat. where they're building relationships with people in the community. Because after all, the way you bring down crime in a community is not simply by making arrests, but by preventing crime from occurring. And that's the essence of community policing. It focuses on prevention. So my experiences in New Orleans in the 1990s was that you could combine an accountable police force with public safety, bring down crime, and reduce friction between police officers and the community. Those are the kinds of things that the Urban League embraces.
Mr. Morial, we want to thank you so much for coming in today, sir.
Thank you.